Hi, my name's Tori and I wish I knew more about blood products.
Hi, my name's Letitia. I wish I knew more about taking care of myself when starting shift work.
Hi, my name is Lydia. I wish I would know more about how to work as in a team and solve conflict.
Hello, welcome to Five Things, the nursing podcast from the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. My name is Liz Crow.
I'm Jesse Spur, and this
Hello,
is a podcast
my name is Liz
by,
Crow.
And I'm Jesse Spur.
Welcome to another episode of Five Things, and we're going to do something quite different
we
today.
Hope to connect with
we
the
are
global community
Rebecca
as we move from surviving to thriving.
and she's going to talk to us about being on the other side of nursing a lived experience of cancer, because Rebecca's husband was diagnosed with a brain tumour and sadly passed away, and it has altered the way she's doing nursing, and she's come to talk to us about that. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, Jesse and Liz.
Awesome. So we are still going to follow our regular format because part of the message of this is the wearing two hats in healthcare, and we all do it in some aspect. Like we're showing up 100% for patients and families on a good day, and we're showing up 100% for our own families on a good day. So we'd still love to hear your nursing story and then how that sort of had this unexpected impact into being on the other side.
Thank you. So I became a nurse back in 2007. I graduated, and quite interestingly, nursing was never a career path that I thought for myself. It just happened, and absolutely love it. Every day is inspiring. And so I worked in a medical assessment unit for quite some time, and then I thought, no, I'd like to specialise. So I went on and did my diabetes postgraduate studies, and not long after that, I decided I would like to become a nurse practitioner. So I recently completed my nurse practitioner course back in 2021.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm currently working with the diabetes service in community and oral health.
Yeah, wonderful. And so we are going to follow our Five Things format, but we're going to let you tell your story. So before we get right into what motivated you to do the podcast, can you just tell us a little bit about the story about you and Gary and your family and what happened?
Of course. So I guess to start off with, I shouldn't use the word normal, but we had what you would class as a normal life. We both worked. We have two beautiful children, and life was just busy and crazy. And just one day he had a headache, and generally, you wouldn't put much thought to that. You have a headache, you have Panadol, and it goes away, gets better. And that particular day, it just, when you have that gut feeling, it seemed to me more than a headache. So I was actually at work that day, and he'd had a fair bit of analgesia, and it just didn't go away.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like him to come home from work. The fact that he said to me, I'm coming home, I've got a headache, it just triggered some thoughts, what's going on. So I decided we need to get this checked out, and we went to our local ED. It was after hours, so GP obviously was closed, and we had the most devastating news. We thought it would just be a migraine and he'd be told to just, rest and recover. He'd be fine. But a few hours into our stay there, we were told that he had a 2.5 centimetre lesion in his temporal lobe.
Right. How devastating. So completely unexpected, had been completely well until that point.
Absolutely.
And then your lives completely devastated.
Yeah. I remember I phoned my family the next day, and my sister nearly fell off the treadmill, actually. She was exercising, and I said, we're an emergency and he's got a brain tumour. And yeah, we were just, it was unreal. I spent the whole night crying in ED with him. I've never cried so much. And that crushing feeling, that moment where you hear of it in the movies, but you don't really relate to it. It actually happened. Life just stopped spinning in that moment.
Yeah. And so the reason that you've come to the podcast today is because you told me and Jesse that this really has transformed the way that you think about nursing now.
Oh, absolutely. So as I said, I work in diabetes, but along with my husband and his journey, I guess I reflected a lot on my own practice and just those simple things as like language and listening to your patients, it really makes a huge difference. These memories, obviously, my husband is no longer here, but I know for the rest of my life, I will carry these memories forever.
Yeah. So how long was Gary sick for before he died?
So he, about 12 months.
Yeah, so very fast.
Yeah, it was very aggressive. And, you know, being from my nursing experience, I had looked after patients with GBM, and I always knew that it has a devastating prognosis, but I never thought it would be my husband.
Yeah.
And I know the day we went to the oncologist, and this is where my nursing hat is coming on. I walk into the room with him and I see on the screen GBM. This was the doctor's screen, and straight away.
Just explain what GBM is for people who may not be familiar.
Glioblastoma multiforme. So it's a grade 4 brain tumour and it's very aggressive. So prognosis without treatment, so without surgery, it's only a few months.
Yeah. Okay. And did Gary go on to have surgery?
Yeah. So he, sadly to say, he had 5 surgeries. So 3 of those were purely for debulking of that tumour, so removing those tumour cells as much as possible. And he had some post-operative complications, so he required more intervention there.
Yeah.
He also had chemotherapy, which was a tablet form, but it still had those side effects: hair loss, nausea, vomiting, lethargy, and he had radiation as well.
Yeah. And how old were your children at point of diagnosis?
So my son was 6 and my daughter was 9.
Yeah, so you've got little kids, a really busy life. You're studying to be a nurse practitioner. You know, you think that life can't get any harder, and then this devastating diagnosis and the world, as you knew it, just literally stops.
It did. It did. I lost myself during that time. I naturally, and it was in a very vulnerable state, but it's like everything stopped.
Yeah.
Not that career mattered, but I had high aspirations for myself, for my husband, the dreams, those things that you often talk about.
Yeah.
You know, when the kids are older, we'll do that holiday, we'll do this then, and just all that just I everything stopped.
And it's gone.
It's gone. Yeah, that's right. I remember he had a surgery New Year's Eve, and I went home, came back the next day after a few hours of sleep, and I had a car accident. And again, it's those people, the way they make you feel. I remember I was crying.
Yeah.
We pulled over at a petrol station. It was my fault.
Yeah.
And someone came to offer me water.
Yeah.
I don't know who that was.
Yeah.
But again, that person, the way they made me feel.
So grateful. Yeah. All right. So we're not gonna be diligent about following that. You have said this is far more important to you than just telling a sad story about your husband, your cherished, loved husband and father of your children dying. The big thing for you that you wanted to do the podcast was to say how this has actually changed your nursing practice and the lessons learned and experienced that you'd like to share with our listeners. So your first one is that patients are people first. So what were you able to kind of see from the other side about that?
So I guess going back to my husband, he was in a very weak moment of his life. So the way he was in hospital wasn't him as a person. And I guess that's what I'm trying to show is that we know healthcare is very busy, and the needs from our patients, we're juggling. We're juggling the requirements from the medical routine. So we're struggling with time constraints and what our patients really need. And sometimes they just want your time. You know, you're so busy, but for them, those hourly rounds, they're actually waiting. When are you going to come back and come back with their analgesia or just to see how they are? And while at times it might appear that they're demanding, and I'm trying to be careful with my words because I've been a nurse myself on a very busy ward, but are they really being demanding, or are they just really anxious and uncertain about their future? So with my husband, he was a person who worked full time. He was very active. He didn't need anyone to give him any medications, let alone pain relief. And he was very self-sufficient. But suddenly things flipped and he was anxious. He'd get really overwhelmed with needles, with injections, MRI scans. He struggled with claustrophobia. And that was something I never knew until the fact when he needed MRI scans. And I guess what I'm getting to is that procedures had to be cancelled because he was anxious and he couldn't go through with it. But that didn't define him as a person. He was going through so much at that time.
So you're saying that really you couldn't even identify who you'd known your whole life with who he was as a patient just because he was so overwhelmed by the diagnosis, how weak his body had already, suddenly become, etc.
Of course. He was really grateful for the medical, nursing, overall healthcare that he received. But in the moment, all he could see was that he had 2 little children. And he even said to me, "You're really young. What's going to happen to you?
Yeah.
Will my children remember me?" So that's all he saw. And so I know from the other side that behind the scenes, nurses are very busy. Medical staff are very busy. And so when we're talking about medication round at 8 a.m., 8 p.m., they might be delayed. But for my husband, for him, it was that medication might save me. So if it's 8 o'clock, where is it?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that he was being demanding, but that's all he knew. And that became his priority and his own focus.
I think one thing that's just absolutely hammering me out of hearing this is just how all that gets left when someone's in the acute health system is their frailties, their fears, their anxiety, and there's not much space for them projecting all of the other stuff. So all of the weaknesses are laid to bear and none of the strengths are kind of easily transmitted to the people that he's interacting with, that you're interacting with every day.
That's right. I mean, he absolutely adored his family and he took a lot of pride in his job. And often I knew that everyone's busy and I'd say to him, you don't need to go into all the details.
Yeah.
But he would love to share his story and introduce me and what I do. He took a lot of pride in the fact that I was starting to become a nurse practitioner. So he would always make a point of saying that to everyone. And and that's why I'm here, why I did my nurse practitioner course. But I guess the thing I'm trying to say is that they are people and they've got their journey and their story.
Jessie this is not Jessie's saying, but Jessie taught me this saying that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And, if you've got a patient who is desperate, desperately scared, desperately frightened, desperate for you to see them as more than the person in bed 34 with a brain tumour, then sometimes slowing down and just listening and seeing them beyond the person with the brain tumour to Gary, a person who had dreams and aspirations, who's frightened, who's worried about the future of their family, etc., can actually make things go faster because you've given them the time. They know that you're seeing them as a human being and therefore, more comfortable to have you leave the room again.
Of course. And again, I'll put my nursing hat on. It's a busy shift and sometimes it's impossible to remember all your patients' names. And I don't know what the answer to that is. But being on the other side with Gary, for me, it was confronting when I would hear labels like the brain tumour's here or bed 6 needs his meds.
Yeah.
And they are little things. And really in the scheme of things, they're probably not very significant. But when your whole life is crumbling, those small things, you really pick up on that.
Yeah, I was working with a nurse the other day who's saying she gets really overwhelmed. She's a new graduate and she gets really overwhelmed, can't remember names, etc. And I said, don't you guys have whiteboards above all the beds? She's like, yeah. And I said, why don't you just say to the patient, I'm not great with names and I, like little prompts. So I'm just going to write your name and your family's name and thing above the bed if that's okay.
Yeah, that's right. And there are whiteboards, but again, it's busy.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't even have time to write their name on the board, but it's okay to just say to your patient, be human and just say, sorry, I forgot your name again.
Yeah. That kind of draws us beautifully into the second point that you wanted to make, was about healthcare is always busy, but taking those little moments can make a profound difference to patients and their families.
Yeah. So I know in healthcare, in order for it to flow, unfortunately, there has to be routine. There has to be schedules because time is of the essence. But within that routine, just taking those small moments when you're going in to do the obs round, making that eye contact.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that I was trying to be judgmental, but those are the things that Gary would pick up on. I would notice, when someone was showing empathy and actually pausing, doing your blood pressure, but just pausing and, okay, those small gestures, okay, that person, even if it's just in that moment, they care. They're listening to me. And it meant so much. Gary often, it was during COVID that he had his first surgery.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, I was unable to be with him. We tried desperately, but obviously the situation was such that I wasn't able to be here. And so when he went in for the first surgery, he often told me about a nurse who walked him to theatre, held his hand. I don't know the nurse's name. He couldn't remember her name, but the way she made him feel, and he would often tell me about this nurse, and geez, I would love to know who this was and thank this person. But just to show that those small things that you might think are insignificant, but people will carry these memories forever.
It's such a lovely example because it's a task that's being done anyway. And so it's about the how of it being done and showing just that human attunement, because you could do that same task of walking someone from day procedure or wherever they've checked in for theatre to the anaesthetic bay and be hyper distracted trying to do another task at the same time and not make them, or you could just be present and do that and hold their hand or reassure them as you're going around there. So it's a great example, and there's so many of those opportunities where it's not adding time or burden or work. It's just being present wholly for that one encounter.
And it's not a big duration of time. That's not what you're suggesting, but you're saying if you're going to take the blood pressure while you're putting the cuff on, the nurses who were able to say, oh, Gary, like which arm do you prefer, or how are you feeling today? Or, breakfast isn't far away. Are you hungry? To just make something to build that connection, right, is so important. And when my brother was having chemo here, I was crazy. Like I literally was crazy. And I would have these almost compulsions that I know were insane, but that, like if people liked us enough, maybe he had a better chance of something miraculous happening, or if people saw who he was, maybe they would offer us something that, they're crazy thoughts. I'd worked in hospital for decades when he got diagnosed, but it's that if you feel that you're seen, you're hoping against hope that maybe there's going to be a different outcome, aren't you?
Of course. And let's face it, healthcare, it's not going to change. It's probably just going to get even busier. We're in an epidemic with chronic disease, so things are just going to get busier, and we're not going to get that extra time or those resources that we so desperately need. So with the time that you have, just make it count.
Yeah. If you're in the room anyway, if you're doing something anyway, make eye contact, connect, have a little conversation, say, oh, your cereal looks a bit soggy, is that how you like it? Anything that keeps demonstrating you can see the person in front of you.
Yeah. And sometimes, for example, I wasn't here because the children were little as well, so they needed mummy.
Yeah.
And so I would miss the ward rounds and the anxiety of waiting the next day. Like your life depended on that, really. I mean, to me, it felt like a missed opportunity. So if I ever missed those rounds, I'd be beside myself.
Yeah.
And I knew how the system worked. I knew that the surgeons were busy. So, if it was Friday and I missed those rounds, I'm going to be waiting till Monday. And you know, the staff that had that time to just sit beside Gary. And I know, again, infection control.
Yeah.
But, you know, if there was a chair and they could sit eye to eye with him, I could see he was a different person. He felt heard.
Your third point is really about this empathy. What did you notice with Gary when he felt, I guess, comfortable, seen, heard, when he had a nurse that you would have described as more empathic, as more connected, as more whatever? Like, what difference did you see when you visited, when you felt that was the sort of nursing care you were getting?
I could see in him that he had hope.
Yeah.
And in the scheme of things, it wasn't going to make a difference. You know, he had a devastating diagnosis with a terrible prognosis, but within him, he was different. The hardest thing for me was when he would say, "Oh, do you have to go home now?"
Yeah.
You know, visiting hours would close at, I think it was 8 p.m. and how he was going to get through the night. And he would ask me, "Can you please let the nurse know that I need my medication at this time?"
Yeah.
And I would try my best and, even apologize, just to say, he's not being demanding, but he gets really anxious about this and he's having an MRI tomorrow. So please, can he have his diazepam? And it's not that he's seeking other medication.
Yeah.
It's just he is really worked up about this procedure and he can't help it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he doesn't want to fail.
He
And
doesn't.
I think that's the thing of being empathetic rather than sympathetic, is actually going, there's been missed procedures because of him being too worried or too anxious. And so, it's not just managing anxiety. It's not wanting to fail again at something when he's been someone that's not failed a lot in life.
Yeah, that's right. And given the situation, having these procedures or investigations was crucial. And if he, so when he knew he was having an MRI, for him, when he felt heard and staff were able to slow down, it really made him reassured, because it's easy to assume, oh, this is just the procedure. So for the MRI of the head, he had to have like a mask more or less over his face.
Yeah.
And the week leading up to it, he would be really overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't to say he was weak. Geez, he was a real brave person, a real inspiration. I mean, he was someone who would work 12-hour shifts and want to spend time with the children. And I would say, "You should be asleep right now." Or, "I want to go for a jog. I want to spend time. I want to go cycling with the children."
Yeah, and we don't see that. I guess before we started recording, you were saying that when Gary went on to palliative care, the empathy from the palliative care nurses was completely next level. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Again, I'm going back to healthcare being a fast-paced environment. So you could just see that, from our first encounter, from the emergency room door through to palliative care, it was different. Each and every step along the way. And see, the way I see it is that nurturing care is all aspects of nursing. It's not just palliative care. It's right from the beginning. It's those day procedures. It's those outpatient appointments. And sadly to say, we didn't really see that till we ended up in palliative care.
And so again, just to have around the point, you're not doing this as a judgment. You continue to work in a very busy clinical setting yourself as a nurse practitioner. You know the challenges of our system. It's just about, if you're in the room anyway, maximize the opportunity to connect, even if it's for 30 seconds.
Oh, absolutely. So, for example, when we were going in for our oncology appointments, and I've got a habit of saying us and our, because even though I wasn't living it, but I felt very much a part of it.
Of course you were, yeah.
So when Gary had his oncology appointments, and these used to be weekly, sometimes monthly, and again, that place is busy. It's intense.
It is.
And very cold.
Yes.
And we could tell that, okay, we would actually go in with a list because we knew that the oncologist had a lot of patients to see. So I knew again that if I forget to ask this, it's going to be a missed opportunity. I won't be able to call in and say, oh, I forgot to ask about that.
Yeah.
So
You get one shot at it, don't you?
You do.
Yeah.
And again, amazing care from everyone, but our oncologist was just really busy.
Yeah.
But this was probably 6 months into his diagnosis and the atmosphere was very different. And there was eye contact and the chair wasn't facing the computer. It was facing Gary and myself. And we knew that it wasn't good news straight away. And I guess that demonstrates to me is that the language you use, people do see that.
Yeah.
They're not judging you, but unfortunately, they are desperate for those words that are going to come out of your mouth. They just, they are so literally sitting on the edge of their seat.
Yeah.
It's a real shame that that's the point at which kind of empathy and humanity is restored, is when there's bad news to be given.
Yeah. I mean, that day we had our children with us just because I've got an amazing family who are very supportive, but the children just wanted to be with mummy and daddy. So they came with us to that appointment. And so they happened to be with us and they got chocolates that day. And again, I thought, oh no, this can't be good.
Yeah. That leads us again beautifully into the importance of the patient's family and friends and their role in all of that. Recognizing that, particularly for yourself, you've got 2 young children, your husband is dying, you're trying to you know how busy the system is. How can healthcare professionals, though, tap into that wonderful resource of family and friends better?
Again, it really just comes back to those simple things. So for me, I'll give you some examples. Getting that phone call to say, okay, Gary's out of surgery and it went well.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah.
That anxious wait, I'd be waiting, 6 hours or more just for that phone call. And finally, when COVID restrictions were eased off a bit, I was able to be in the hospital. Geez, I think I sat in probably every corner. I would walk up and down.
Yeah.
How many floors do we have? Is it 9, 10 floors?
Yeah.
I'd walk up and down. And that anxious wait in that surgery room, that waiting room, just to someone to say, okay, he's still in surgery or just to acknowledge that you're there.
That you're still waiting. Yeah.
And I think it was just luck off the draw. We seemed to be the last people to leave always. So whether it was an oncology appointment or his surgery, I know the lights would often go off. People would leave the room and I'd be still waiting. One of his surgeries was New Year's Eve, as I mentioned. And so fortunately I was able to wait in the room. But just for his nurse just to pop in and say, okay, he's in recovery now.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately didn't get that all the time. And again, I know it's busy. Sometimes just to have those 30 seconds, you've got IVABs due when you've got, a family member who's waiting. What do you do? But just those few words.
But 30 seconds, it can mean an absolute everything to you. And we're a couple of years down the track and you're still thinking about that. And the healthcare professionals aren't thinking about that day. Do you know what I mean? That's what I say. Like I always say that families are the long-term survivors of all of this. And we want to make sure that you're surviving it, that we've put you on the best possible pathway we can with the worst possible outcome. And part of that is about that every interaction actually does matter.
That's right. And then I guess another thing to bring into it is culture. I mean, palliative care, it's off to them. They were amazing. I had my amazing family here in Australia and from India. And again, my background is Indian. And so the cultural dynamics are very, very different. And those medical staff and nursing staff were just amazing. They were able to have a conversation with the whole family. And again, that time is the factor. I mean, I know my healthcare setting, when I've got a family meeting, just making the time to include everyone, it takes more effort, without a doubt. But everyone felt heard.
There can be an efficiency in it though. And this is the thing that I just keep coming back to is good care is efficient care. And we keep messing this up somehow. The intersections between empathy and the importance of family, I think, are just so important to get in a real practical way. So hearing your experience of wearing two hats, you're a clinician that knows the system and is still struggling to navigate the system and still feeling disempowered by it. That things like you came with a list. We can encourage patients and families to actually generate a list between these expected encounters. And that's something I've done very much over my time in ICU and ward nursing, was saying, if something pops into your head as a question, write it down so you don't forget to ask it if I'm not here or someone's not here to help you with that when the ward round comes around, because they're like ghosts. Sometimes the ward rounds are. Yeah. Things like going, this was a habit I built for myself, and it was purely self-serving when I would help settle in a family into the waiting room of ICU while we were admitting someone, saying, if I am not back in half an hour, please ring the buzzer. It doesn't mean something bad's going on. It may mean that I've just got pulled into something and time slipped away. And it's the same thing. If you haven't heard from us by 5 o'clock, please ring. We just may have got completely lost and distracted because it takes that kind of, we're really anxious to do that. We feel like we're going to be a hassle. We feel like we're going to be judged if we do that. So it takes all that sense of judgment out of it. But it also sets me up to not look like I don't care because I've forgotten, because that's the assumption that gets left if you haven't given that permission.
And that, I agree, the efficiency in empathy, because if you've got a large family or you've got often, a divided family where there's two wives and there's two sets of children, if we don't communicate well the first time, all that happens is there's disruption after disruption after disruption as each individual person wants the information, so let's do it properly the first time. The family feels seen, heard, like that they're part of the decision making, but also means the rest of your day is much more of a dream, that you can get on with doing all the other stuff that you have to do.
I agree. So I guess with nursing and, we hear of a lot of theory in nursing, and I've been in the academic side for a while myself as well. So you often hear of it, you read about it, you're told about it, but really I think it stems back to the basics. So, you hear about bedside handover and the hourly rounding, but those small things, you don't have to use big words or give it a label, but just, while you're in the room, is there anything else I can do for you? Actually saying that and meaning it. It will make your job easier. And the patient will just feel, oh, okay, they do care. Often I would say to Gary, and I think this was probably my nursing hat on, I would say to him, don't keep pressing the buzzer.
Yeah.
Don't bother the nurses. And there were simple things like water. And because of health and safety, I wasn't allowed to go into that kitchenette to refill his water. And he would buzz to get the water refilled.
And this is that efficiency thing, right? Like when you've got a really anxious patient who's anxious because they're actually dying and they have a brain tumor and they've got a million things that they're worried about, the more they feel heard, the less they're going to interrupt you. The more they feel abandoned, the higher their anxiety, the more they're going to be on the buzzer. And we recognize that all of this is happening in amongst lots of patients having lots of needs. But I think less is sometimes more. Your last point is about this nursing legacy. You're a couple of years down the track. These memories, Jessie and I can see your face. These memories are as fresh and as painful or as positive as if they were 5 seconds ago. What do you want to leave? Like when you talk about nursing legacy, what was important for you to share with us?
So I guess I'll talk a little bit about myself. I was never very ambitious when it came to career. As I said, I landed in nursing and I happen to love it. And I've just gone with the flow. So I never really had any intentions. I will specialize in a particular area, but life has just given me opportunities and I've followed the journey. And I guess what I'm saying is that I've seen through Gary's journey that unfortunately you may not always be heard. And that has really inspired me to actually be here today with yourself, Liz and Jessie, that I want to keep his legacy very much alive through my own nursing legacy.
Before we started recording, and I didn't want to just leave it off the tape, so to speak, you mentioned that a big motivator for continuing and pushing through with your nurse practitioner studies was kind of this sense and this wrestle with that you yourself probably lacked a bit of a voice, but nurses do as well. And so that kind of recognition of actually the more I promote myself in terms of knowledge, power, we work in a hierarchical system, actually gives voice to some of the really important things that you feel really compelled to say. I reckon that's a really undersold part of our nursing legacy. We think about there's a lot of the platitudes of, it's how we make patients feel and families feel, and that is critical. Like, that's a huge legacy that we leave. But the legacy of actually how we grow our profession and the voice in it was something that really inspired me before we started recording, that you said that you were naturally a quiet and reserved person that wouldn't put yourself forward, and that's changed.
Absolutely. So I was really fortunate to hear Liz present at a nurse practitioner workshop. And at that moment, I felt inspired. I'd often say to people that I'd like to write a book one day. I haven't actually put any thought to that. But the moment I heard Liz present, I thought, I want to approach her, but someone else beat me to it and introduced us. And here I am today. I've never been a public speaker. I get butterflies, I get nervous. But I think this is my legacy, is through Gary and his legacy. I want to speak and I want to share his journey. It's not just about cancer and end of life care. It is just about being human.
And good nursing practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People can't see. I feel like we're a bit teary in here because because Rebecca is a very shy person. I can see that by nature, who has really put herself out today to share something just so personal and powerful. And I guess, I don't want to wreck that summary of what you've just said, but I guess the take-home messages are, we understand, all of us, all three of us remain very busy clinicians in the same healthcare system with all of those increasing demands. And what we want people to remember is our patients are people first. They had lives, they had dreams, they had goals before they ended up in our doorstep, often from no fault of their own. We need to remember that. We need to remember to slow down and make eye contact, rub their hands as they're going into theatre, be reassuring, pick up the phone for 20 seconds to tell their family and friends, they're still in theatre, nothing's gone wrong. We will call you when they come out, because these things are important and they make a huge difference years down the track. That our empathy is very different from sympathy, and empathy is really about just sitting with people while it's tough, acknowledging that it's tough and doing anything that we can to make that horrible life-altering moments any tiny bit better that we can. So, even when you're taking blood pressure, just to ask, how was lunch? Or do you have any visitors today? Or is there any, are you cold? Is there something that I can do for you? Number 4 is that behind every patient, on the whole, it's not always true, but most people have family, friends, community, lives where these people are incredibly important to them. Like, how do we involve them? How do we communicate with them? How do we help ease this experience for them as well? And number 5, what will be our nursing legacy, not just patient to patient, but more globally, and hopefully people don't have to have a life-altering event like you have, Rebecca, to realise that I believe we have a huge responsibility as healthcare professionals to be a voice of reason, of advocacy, sometimes even political, to say, we need more, we need help to do the very important jobs that we do every day. Rebecca, hugely humbled to have met you today. Thank you for being so courageous and sharing your story on 5 Things.
Thank you so much, Liz and Jessie, for having me here today. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
The Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital 5 Things Nursing podcast acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands we now tread. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands have always been places of healing, teaching and learning. We also wish to acknowledge the First Nations people of the lands of our global community and encourage our listeners to seek out, listen and learn from the knowledge held in your shared space. As well as all major podcast outlets, you can find us at 5thingsnursing.podbean.com. Please also subscribe and give us a rating on your listening platform of choice. This helps others find the podcast. And finally, if you'd like to connect with Liz or myself on Twitter, we can be found at LizCrow2, and for me, it's inject_orange. We would absolutely love to hear your thoughts, ideas, or feedback. Thanks for listening to 5 Things.